The stars looked different now that Earth was gone. Commander Alex Reed stood on the bridge of the Deep Space Vessel Freedom's call and stared at the empty coordinates where his home planet should have been. 3 years had passed since that terrible day when the blue marble that held every human story simply vanished in a burst of alien fire. Alex remembered watching the attack unfold on the emergency broadcast channels. The alien ships had appeared without warning, massive black vessels that seemed to swallow light itself. They called themselves the Voidborn, though humans had learned this name from intercepted communications rather than any attempt at diplomacy. The creatures inside those ships never tried to speak with humanity. They simply arrived and began their work of destruction. The first strikes hit the major cities. New York disappeared in seconds, swallowed by a beam of purple energy that left nothing but a smoking crater where millions had lived and loved and dreamed. London followed minutes later, then Tokyo, then every population center across the globe. The lucky ones died in those first few minutes. The unlucky ones watched their world burn for 3 agonizing hours as the Voidborn methodically erased every trace of human civilization. Alex had been commanding a supply run to the Jupiter mining stations when the attack began. His ship was one of hundreds scattered across the solar system who could only watch helplessly as Earth died. The communication channels filled with screams and pleas and final messages from people who knew they would never see another sunrise. Mothers called out to children on distant colonies. Fathers tried to record last words for sons and daughters who might survive. Scientists transmitted their life's work into space, hoping someone would remember what they had discovered. The mining colonies tried to send help, but their civilian transports could not match the speed of the alien warships. The Mars settlements launched every military vessel they had, but it was too little and far too late. By the time any human ship could reach Earth's orbit, there was nothing left to save. The planet that had given birth to humanity was nothing more than a ball of cooling rock floating dead in space. But before Earth went silent forever, before the last power station failed and the final human voice fell quiet, someone managed to send one last transmission. It came from deep beneath the surface, probably from one of the underground command bunkers that were supposed to survive nuclear war. The message went out on every frequency, broadcast to every ship and station and colony in human space. It was just one word, spoken by a voice that sounded calm despite the hell burning above. Remember. That single word had haunted Alex for 3 years. Remember what? Remember the Earth that was lost? Remember the billions of people who died? Remember the green forests and blue oceans and white clouds that would never exist again? Or maybe it meant something else. Maybe it was a command, an order from the dying world to those who survived. Remember this crime and make the aliens pay for what they had done. The word spread through human space like wildfire. Every colony ship picked up the broadcast. Every mining station and research outpost and frontier settlement heard that final message from home. Within days, the scattered fragments of humanity began to change. Grief turned to anger. Desperation became determination. The survivors stopped running and started planning. Alex had seen the transformation happen on his own ship first. His crew of 40 men and women had spent the first week after Earth's death in shock, barely able to function as they processed the magnitude of their loss. But when they heard that single word broadcast from their dying homeworld, something shifted. The communications officer began working double shifts to contact other survivors. The weapons specialists started drawing up plans to convert their mining lasers into combat systems. The navigator plotted courses to known human settlements, calculating how long it would take to gather a force capable of revenge. The same thing was happening on ships and stations throughout human space. The Colonial Defense Fleet, what little remained of it, began receiving messages from every corner of human civilization. Mining companies offered their industrial capacity to build warships. Agricultural colonies pledged their entire output to feed a military force. Research stations shared their most advanced weapons designs. Even the frontier settlements, isolated communities that had barely maintained contact with Earth, sent word that they would contribute whatever they could to the cause. Captain Helen Ross of the research vessel Deep Horizon was among the first to reach Alex's position. Her ship had been studying alien ruins in the Centauri system when Earth died, and she brought news that changed everything. The ruins contained technology, weapons, and defensive systems left by a race that had fought the Voidborn centuries ago. Most of it was beyond human understanding, but some pieces could be adapted. Some of the alien weapons could be rebuilt using human manufacturing techniques. More ships arrived every day. The merchant vessel Star Trader brought news from the outer colonies. The military transport iron will carry evacuated scientists from the Mars research stations. The converted passenger liner New Hope held refugees from Europa who had seen the Earth's destruction from their observation posts. Each ship brought more people, more resources, and more determination to see the Voidborn pay for their crimes. Admiral James Park arrived 3 months after the attack aboard the heavy cruiser Defiance. He had been commanding the patrol fleet in the outer system when Earth died, and he brought with him the largest surviving military force in human space. 67 warships of various classes, from massive dreadnoughts to nimble corvettes. Park was a career military officer who had spent 30 years preparing for threats that might come from deep space. He had never imagined that when the threat finally arrived, it would be too late to save the world he had sworn to protect. But Park brought more than ships and weapons. He brought organization and discipline and the strategic mind needed to turn humanity's rage into something effective. Under his leadership, the scattered survivors began to come together into something that looked like a real military force. Engineers worked around the clock to convert civilian ships into warships. Scientists studied every scrap of intelligence about Voidborn technology. Soldiers trained for the kind of battle that would determine whether humanity had a future or not. The transformation was not easy. Resources were limited, and every day brought new challenges. Food supplies had to be stretched to feed growing numbers of people. Raw materials for ship construction were scarce in the outer system where most survivors had gathered. Weapons manufacturing required techniques that many colonies had never developed. But somehow, despite all the obstacles, the fleet continued to grow. Alex found himself assigned to recruitment duty, traveling between settlements to coordinate their contributions to the war effort. He visited mining colonies where entire families worked in the foundries, turning asteroid metal into hull plating and weapon systems. He met with agricultural settlements that had converted their greenhouses to produce nutrition bars and medical supplies. He spoke with research stations that had abandoned their peaceful projects to focus on developing better ways to kill the aliens who had murdered their world. Everywhere he went, Alex heard the same word that had echoed from Earth's final transmission. Remember. It had become humanity's rallying cry, painted on the hulls of warships and etched into memorial walls, and whispered like a prayer by people who had lost everything they'd ever loved. The word carried different meanings for different people, but it always came back to the same basic truth. Earth was gone, and someone had to pay for that crime. The work continued for 2 years. 2 years of desperate preparation, of converting every available resource into instruments of war, of training civilian volunteers to fight against an enemy that had already proven its ability to destroy worlds. Ships arrived from the furthest reaches of human space, bringing colonists who had spent their life savings on passage to join the growing fleet. Research teams made breakthrough after breakthrough, adapting alien technology and developing new weapon systems. Industrial colonies worked beyond their capacity, producing more ships and supplies than anyone had thought possible. By the time Admiral Park declared the fleet ready for departure, humanity had assembled something unprecedented in galactic history. 100,000 warships of every size and description, crewed by volunteers who had given up everything they had ever known for one chance at revenge. They came from mining colonies and agricultural settlements, from research stations and frontier outposts, from every corner of human space where people still drew breath and remembered what had been lost. The fleet was not perfect. Many of the ships were converted civilian vessels that had never been designed for combat. Many of the crew members were volunteers with minimal military training. Many of the weapons were experimental designs that had never been tested in battle. But what the fleet lacked in professional polish, it made up for in sheer determination and overwhelming numbers. Standing on the bridge of his ship as the great armada prepared to depart, Alex looked out at the sea of vessels stretching beyond the horizon. Massive dreadnoughts bristled with weapons meant to crack planetary defenses. Nimble fighters swarmed around capital ships like angry insects. Transport vessels carried the supplies and personnel needed to sustain the fleet during its long journey to enemy space. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time, a monument to human rage and human determination built from the ashes of their lost world. The final transmission came from Admiral Park's flagship as the fleet prepared to enter hyperspace. His voice carried to every ship in the Armada, to every person who had joined this desperate mission of revenge. "Today we begin our journey to the void-born homeworld," he said. "We go to seek justice for Earth and for every human life that was lost. We carry with us the memory of our world and the hopes of our species, whatever happens in the battles ahead." Lippy said that humanity did not go quietly into the dark. The great fleet entered hyperspace as one, 100,000 ships disappearing into the void between stars. Behind them lay the empty coordinates where Earth had once spun in peaceful orbit around its sun. Ahead lay the unknown depths of space where the void-born waited, unaware that humanity's survivors were coming for them with fire and fury and the memory of a world that would never be forgotten. The assembling of humanity's revenge fleet took place in the dead space between Jupiter and Saturn, far from any inhabited world where spies might observe their preparations. What had started as a handful of survivor ships had grown into something that defied belief. 100,000 vessels of war, each one carrying the hopes and fury of a species that had lost everything. Captain Maria Santos stood on the bridge of the massive dreadnought Retribution and watched the endless parade of ships taking their positions in the Great Formation. Her vessel had been the flagship of the Mars Defense Fleet before Earth died, a kilometer-long monster bristling with enough firepower to crack a moon. Now it served as the tip of humanity's spear, leading a force that dwarfed anything the galaxy had ever seen. The logistics of managing such a fleet were staggering. Every day brought new challenges as more ships arrived from distant colonies. The converted cargo hauled Defiant Star had traveled 8 months from the edge of human space, its holds packed with volunteers and supplies. The research vessel Discovery brought scientists who had spent 2 years developing new weapons based on alien technology. The passenger liner Freedom's Dream carried refugees from a dozen worlds, all seeking their chance to strike back at the creatures who had murdered their home. Admiral James Park had established a command center aboard the Station Unity, a massive construct built from the connected hulks of destroyed ships and salvaged space habitats. From this floating city, he coordinated the movements of the greatest military force in human history. His staff worked around the clock to assign positions, distribute supplies, and plan the complex dance of hyperspace jumps that would carry the Armada to its target. The intelligence reports were frustratingly thin. The Void-born had appeared from the depths of space without warning, struck Earth with overwhelming force, and then vanished just as quickly. Human scouts had spent 3 years searching for any trace of their origin point, following energy signatures and hyperspace distortions across hundreds of light years. Most never returned from their missions, lost in the dark between stars or destroyed by automated defenses around systems that showed signs of Void-born presence. But finally, just 6 months ago, the deep space reconnaissance ship Shadow Walker had found something. Captain Tom Mitchell had pushed his vessel beyond the edge of explored space, following a faint trail of exotic particles that seemed to lead toward a galactic core. After weeks of careful stalking, he had discovered a system unlike anything in human records, a single star surrounded by structures that bent space itself, creating distortions that could be seen from light years away. The system had no name in human star charts, so the fleet designated it Target Prime. Long-range scans suggested at least one inhabited world, though the exotic energy signatures made detailed analysis impossible. What was certain was that the particle trail led directly there, and that the energy readings matched samples taken from the wreckage left behind after Earth's destruction. If the Void-born had a home, this was it. Maria Santos had volunteered to lead the vanguard immediately upon hearing the news. Her ship and crew had been among the first to answer Admiral Park's call for vengeance, and she felt they had earned the right to strike the first blow against humanity's enemies. The Retribution would go in first, followed by the other heavy combat vessels, clearing the way for the massive fleet that would follow. The preparations had taken on an almost religious quality as the departure date approached. Ships that had never been designed for combat were refitted with weapon systems cobbled together from salvaged parts and new designs. The mining vessel Iron Mountain now carried torpedo launchers built into its cargo bays. The research ship Endeavour mounted experimental energy weapons that could theoretically punch through any known defense. Even the smallest courier ships had been armed with whatever weapons they could carry. The human survivors had brought more than just ships to the Great Gathering. They had brought stories, memories of the world that was lost and the people who had died when the Voidborn came. In the recreation areas of the fleet's larger vessels, holographic displays showed images of Earth as it had been. Blue oceans and green continents, great cities filled with light, children playing in parks under an open sky. These images served as both inspiration and reminder what humanity was fighting to avenge. Dr. Lisa Chun worked aboard the research vessel New Horizon, leading a team of scientists who had spent 2 years studying every scrap of Voidborn technology they could find. The aliens had left behind very little when they destroyed Earth, but careful analysis of the wreckage in Earth orbit had revealed fascinating details about their weapons and defenses. The Voidborn seemed to use some form of exotic matter manipulation, bending space and energy in ways that human science was only beginning to understand. Chen's team had made several breakthroughs that might give humanity an edge in the coming battle. They had developed new shield generators based on captured alien technology, creating defensive fields that could absorb and redirect energy attacks. They had also created experimental weapons that fired streams of compressed dark matter, projectiles that could theoretically penetrate any known armor. Whether these weapons would work against their creators remained to be seen. The fleet's composition told the story of humanity's desperation and determination. The core of the Armada consisted of proper military vessels, dreadnoughts and cruisers and destroyers that had been designed for combat. But the majority of the ships were converted civilian vessels, their peaceful purposes transformed into instruments of war. Cargo haulers had become missile platforms. Passenger liners carried boarding parties and assault troops. Even luxury yachts had been armed and armored, their wealthy owners contributing their personal vessels to the cause. Commander Alex Reed found himself assigned to fleet coordination, working from the command station to help manage the complex logistics of moving so many ships in formation. His days were filled with endless streams of data. Fuel consumption rates, ammunition inventories, crew rotations, maintenance schedules. Each ship in the fleet had different capabilities and limitations, and keeping them all functioning as a unified force required constant attention to detail. The diversity of the fleet was both its greatest strength and its greatest weakness. The ships came from dozens of different colonies and manufacturers, each with their own design philosophies and technical standards. Some vessels used fusion reactors, while others relied on antimatter systems. Some ships had artificial gravity, while others operated in zero-G environments. Communication protocols varied between manufacturers, requiring the installation of universal translation systems just to coordinate basic movements. But this diversity also meant that the fleet could adapt to almost any situation. If one type of ship proved vulnerable to Voidborn weapons, dozens of other designs might survive and continue fighting. If conventional weapons failed, the fleet carried experimental systems that might succeed where traditional approaches could not. The Armada was like a vast ecosystem of war machines, each one contributing something unique to the overall effort. The training exercises had been intense and sometimes dangerous. Ships that had never operated in military formations learned to move in concert with their neighbors. Crews that had spent their lives in peaceful occupations practiced combat maneuvers and weapons targeting. The converted passenger liner Hope's End had actually collided with a cargo hauler during one exercise, requiring weeks of repairs and serving as a harsh reminder that this makeshift fleet was still learning to fight as one. Admiral Park had insisted on realistic combat drills despite the risks involved. The fleet practiced hyperspace insertions, coordinated weapon strikes, and defensive formations that could protect damaged vessels. They ran scenarios based on everything the intelligence teams had learned about Voidborn tactics, though everyone knew that the aliens might have capabilities that humanity had never encountered. The morale throughout the fleet was unlike anything the military officers had ever experienced. These were not professional soldiers following orders, but survivors seeking vengeance for the greatest crime in human history. Every person aboard every ship had lost something when Earth died. Family members, friends, homes, entire ways of life. They fought not for pay or glory or political goals, but for the simple human need to strike back at those who had wronged them, Religious services aboard the fleet ships drew enormous crowds as people sought comfort and meaning in the face of the unknown. Chaplains from dozens of different faiths worked together to provide spiritual guidance to crews that included believers and atheists alike. The message was always the same regardless of the specific religion. Humanity would not go quietly into the dark, and the memory of Earth would live on in the hearts of those who survived. The final weeks before departure were marked by a sense of anticipation that seemed to vibrate through the very hull plating of the ships. Everyone knew that this was likely a one-way mission. The fleet was traveling to the far edge of known space to attack an enemy that had already proven its ability to destroy entire worlds. Many of the people aboard the ships would not live to see another year, but they had made their peace with that possibility. Maria Santos spent her final evening before departure walking through the corridors of the Retribution, talking with her crew and checking on the preparations. The ship carried 3,000 people, from seasoned military officers to civilian volunteers who had never seen combat. All of them knew what lay ahead, and all of them had chosen to be here despite the risks. The weapons bays hummed with activity as technicians made final adjustments to the ship's armament. The Retribution carried enough firepower to level a continent, from massive particle beam cannons to swarms of guided missiles. But everyone aboard knew that their enemy had destroyed Earth in a matter of hours, suggesting weapons of unimaginable power. Whether humanity's arsenal would be enough remained the greatest question of all. As the departure time approached, Admiral Park transmitted his final orders to the fleet. The ships would travel in waves, with the fastest vessels jumping first to establish reconnaissance positions around Target Prime. The main battle fleet would follow, ready to engage whatever defenses the Voidborn had prepared. The support vessels would remain at the edge of the system, ready to provide assistance or evacuate survivors if the mission failed. The Great Fleet began its final preparations as 100,000 ships prepared to vanish into hyperspace. Behind them lay the scattered remnants of human civilization, hoping and praying for news of victory. Ahead lay the unknown depths of space where humanity's enemies waited, unaware that the survivors of Earth were coming for them with fire and fury and a hunger for justice that would not be denied. The journey through hyperspace felt like traveling through the dreams of the dead. Captain Maria Santos stood in the observation deck of the Retribution and watched the swirling colors of twisted space-time flow past reinforced windows. 6 months of travel lay ahead of them. 6 months to cross the vast emptiness between human space and the system where their enemies waited. The Great Fleet moved through hyperspace in formation, 100,000 ships maintaining their relative positions despite the strange physics that governed faster-than-light travel. The largest vessels created hyperspace wakes that the smaller ships could follow, reducing fuel consumption and ensuring that the entire armada would arrive at Target Prime at the same time. It was a complex dance of mathematics and engineering that required constant attention from the navigation teams. Admiral James Park had established a routine that kept the fleet functioning during the long journey. Each day began with status reports from every ship in the Armada, updates on fuel levels and equipment readiness and crew morale. The command staff aboard the Station Unity processed thousands of reports, tracking everything from food supplies to ammunition stores to the psychological state of the volunteers who made up most of the fleet. The first month of the journey had been the hardest, as crews adjusted to life aboard ships that had never been designed for extended military operations. The converted passenger liner New Dawn suffered a complete life support failure when too many people tried to use the recreational facilities at once. The cargo hauler Ironwood experienced engine problems when civilian technicians unfamiliar with military maintenance procedures made critical errors. 3 smaller vessels had to return to human space when structural problems made continued travel impossible. But gradually, the fleet had settled into its rhythm. Civilian volunteers learned military discipline and procedures. Engineers developed solutions to problems that had never existed before the conversion of peaceful ships to instruments of war. Commanders found ways to maintain morale and readiness during the endless months of hyperspace travel. The Great Armada became more than just a collection of ships. It became a community, united by shared purpose and shared loss. Commander Alex Reed found himself serving as a liaison between the military leadership and civilian volunteers who made up most of the fleet. His days were spent traveling between ships via shuttle, meeting with crew leaders and solving problems that range from technical difficulties to personal conflicts. The diversity of the fleet meant that every ship had different needs and different capabilities, requiring constant coordination to keep everyone working toward the same goal. The stories that Reed heard during his visits revealed the true scope of humanity's loss. Aboard the research vessel Deep Thought, he met Dr. Sarah Kim, a xenobiologist who had been studying alien life forms when Earth died. She had lost her entire family in the attack, including 3 children who had been visiting their grandparents in Seoul when the Voidborn strikes began. Now she worked 18-hour days analyzing captured alien technology, driven by a need to understand the creatures who had murdered her world. The mining ship Rock Crusher carried an entire family of asteroid miners who had pooled their resources to convert their industrial equipment into weapon systems. The Patel family had operated in the outer system for 3 generations, following veins of rare metals through the asteroid belt. When Earth died, they had immediately volunteered their ship and their expertise, knowing that their industrial lasers could be modified to cut through alien armor just as easily as they cut through rock. Each ship in the fleet carried similar stories of loss and determination. The passenger transport Wanderer held refugees from Europa who had watched Earth's destruction through their colony's telescopes. The fast Courier Mercury's flight was crewed entirely by former Earth postal workers who had been making deliveries throughout the solar system when their home world burned. The luxury yacht Golden Dream belonged to a billionaire industrialist who had converted his pleasure craft into a command ship for coordinating supply deliveries. Dr. Lisa Chun continued her research aboard the science vessel New Horizon, working with teams of experts to understand the alien technology that had destroyed Earth. The samples they had collected from the wreckage in Earth orbit were limited, but careful analysis had revealed fascinating details about voidborn weapons and defensive systems. The aliens seemed to manipulate matter at the quantum level, creating effects that human science was only beginning to understand. Chen's team had made several breakthrough discoveries during the journey. They had learned to recognize the energy signatures of voidborn weapons, information that would help the fleet's gunners target enemy ships more effectively. They had also developed countermeasures for some of the alien defensive systems, jamming techniques that might prevent the Voidborn from simply disappearing when the battle began. Most importantly, they had created new weapons that used principles reverse engineered from alien technology. The experimental weapons were installed aboard selected ships throughout the fleet. The heavy cruiser Vengeance carried prototype particle cannons that fired streams of exotic matter at near light speed. The destroyer Swift Justice mounted experimental missile systems that could track targets through hyperspace. Even some converted civilian vessels carried new defensive systems based on alien shield technology. Whether these weapons would prove effective against their creators remained to be seen. The long journey also brought unexpected allies. 3 months into their trip, the fleet encountered another group of survivors, alien refugees fleeing from worlds that the Voidborn had destroyed. The first contact came from a damaged vessel that appeared on the fleet's sensors like a ghost, its hull scarred by weapons that used the same energy signatures as those that had killed Earth. The alien ship identified itself as the Last Song, carrying the survivors of a race called the Melody People. Their homeworld had been destroyed 2 years before Earth died, consumed by the same purple fire that had murdered humanity's birthplace. The ship's captain, who called himself Harmony in the translated communications, requested permission to join humanity's quest for vengeance. Admiral Park had been skeptical at first. The alien vessel could be a trap, a void-born trick designed to infiltrate the human fleet. But detailed scans revealed technology that was clearly different from what the Voidborn used, and emotional resonance in the translated communications seemed genuine. The Melody People had lost everything just as humanity had, and they sought the same justice that drove the human survivors. More alien refugees joined the fleet as news of humanity's mission spread through the survivor networks that existed in the dark spaces between stars. The crystalline beings who called themselves the Builders sent a vessel filled with living machines that could repair damaged ships during battle. The aquatic tide dancers contributed their knowledge of hyperspace navigation, helping the fleet find faster routes to their destination. The insectoid hive speakers provided swarms of small fighters that could overwhelm enemy defenses through sheer numbers. Each new ally brought their own stories of loss and their own reasons for seeking revenge against the Voidborn. The builders had been a peaceful race of architects who created beautiful structures across hundreds of worlds until the Voidborn came and reduced their greatest works to radioactive ash. The Tide Dancers had been explorers and traders who carried culture and knowledge between the stars until their entire civilization was erased in a single day. The Hive Speakers had been gardeners who tended vast ecosystems across multiple planets until the Voidborn turned their living worlds into lifeless rocks. The growing alliance changed the nature of the fleet from a human revenge mission to something larger, a coalition of survivors seeking justice for crimes that spanned the galaxy. The tactical implications were enormous, as each alien race brought different technologies and capabilities to the combined force. The builders' living machines could repair battle damage in real time. The Tide Dancers' navigation skills allowed for more precise hyperspace jumps. The Hive Speakers' fighters provided screening forces that could protect the larger ships. But the Alliance also created new challenges. Communication between species required constant translation, and cultural differences sometimes led to misunderstandings that threatened cooperation. The Melody People's concept of tactics emphasized harmony and coordination, while the Hive Speakers preferred overwhelming swarm attacks. The Builders wanted to capture Voidborn technology for study, while many humans simply wanted to destroy everything connected to their enemies. Admiral Park worked tirelessly to forge a diverse alliance into an effective fighting force. Joint training exercises became common, as different species learned to coordinate their attacks. Human engineers worked with alien technicians to integrate different technologies into unified systems. Diplomatic teams led by Alex Reed helped resolve conflicts between species whose values and methods sometimes clashed. The final months of the journey were marked by increasing tension as the fleet approached its destination. Long-range sensors began detecting energy signatures that matched Voidborn technology, confirming that Target Prime was indeed connected to the aliens who had destroyed Earth. The readings were strange and inconsistent, suggesting defensive systems unlike anything in the Alliance's databases. Intelligence reports from the fleet's scout ships painted a confusing picture of their destination. Target Prime appeared to be a single star system with one inhabited planet, but the energy reading suggested technology that could manipulate space and time on a massive scale. Some of the scout reports described structures that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, creating sensor readings that defied understanding. The most disturbing discovery came from the deep reconnaissance ship, Ghost Walker, which managed to penetrate the outer edge of the Target Prime system before being forced to retreat. Captain Janet Torres reported that the system contained only minimal defenses, a handful of automated platforms that seemed more like monitoring stations and weapons. For a civilization that had destroyed Earth with overwhelming force, the Voidborn homeworld seemed surprisingly undefended. As the Great Fleet prepared for its final approach to Target Prime, the crews aboard every ship made their final preparations for battle. Weapons were checked and rechecked, ammunition was distributed to combat stations, and emergency procedures were reviewed one last time. Many of the people aboard the ships wrote final messages to loved ones who might survive if the mission failed, recording their thoughts and feelings for posterity. The observation decks of the larger ships filled with people who wanted to see their destination with their own eyes as the fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Target Prime system. What they saw there would change everything they thought they knew about their enemies and their quest for revenge. The truth waiting for them in that distant system would transform a mission of vengeance into something none of them had expected when they began their long journey through the darkness between stars. The Target Prime system spread before them like a jewel floating in the cosmic dark. Captain Maria Santos stared through the main view screen of the Retribution at something that defied every expectation they had held about their enemies. Instead of the fortress world they had imagined, instead of massive defense platforms and fleets of warships, they found a single planet of impossible beauty orbiting a golden star. The world below seemed to glow with its own inner light. Crystal spires reached toward the heavens from continents that sparkled like cut gems. Vast gardens were visible from orbit, their colors so vivid they seemed to pulse with life. Rivers of liquid silver wound between cities of living architecture that seemed to grow rather than be built. It was the most beautiful thing any of them had ever seen, and it belonged to the creatures who had murdered Earth. Admiral James Park stood in the command center of the Station Unity and tried to make sense of the tactical readings. The planet showed signs of advanced civilization and technology that bent the laws of physics, but the defensive systems were minimal. A handful of elegant satellites orbited the world, their energy signatures suggesting some kind of monitoring or communication function rather than weapons. There were no battle stations, no defensive fleets, no sign of the overwhelming military force that had destroyed humanity's homeworld. The Great Armada held position at the edge of the system, 100,000 ships waiting for orders that their commanders struggled to give. Every tactical manual ever written said this had to be a trap. No civilization capable of destroying Earth would leave their homeworld so lightly defended. The Voidborn had to be hiding their true strength somehow, waiting for the human fleet to commit to an attack before revealing weapons that could eliminate the entire armada. Commander Alex Reed found himself assigned to the full reconnaissance team, coordinating the scout ships that probed the system's defenses. The fast courier Swift Arrow reported no response to its presence as it approached the planet's outer satellites. The stealth ship Shadow Dancer penetrated deep into the system without encountering any automated defenses. Even the converted yacht Lucky Star managed to approach within a few million kilometers of the planet before being detected. The first sign that they had been noticed came not as weapons fire or defensive maneuvers, but as a simple transmission broadcast on standard communication frequencies. The message was in perfect human English, spoken by a voice that seemed to carry infinite sadness. "We have been waiting for you." The transmission sent shockwaves through the human fleet. How did the Voidborn know their language? How had they been expecting an attack from Earth survivors? The alien voice continued speaking, providing coordinates for what it called a diplomatic meeting, and requesting that humanity send representatives to discuss terms for what it described as the resolution of our mutual tragedy. Maria Santos felt her hands clench into fists as she listened to the alien words. These creatures had murdered billions of innocent people, had reduced Earth to a ball of lifeless rock, and now they want to talk about mutual tragedy, as if both sides had suffered equally. The rage that had sustained her through 3 years of preparation and 6 months of travel burned hotter than ever, demanding that she order an immediate attack on the defenseless world below. But Admiral Park had not survived 30 years of military service by letting emotion override tactical thinking. He called for a fleet-wide conference, connecting commanders of every major vessel in the Armada to discuss their options. The debate that followed revealed the divisions that had always existed beneath the surface of their unified mission. Captain Tom Bradley of the heavy cruiser Iron Fist spoke for the faction that wanted immediate attack. The Voidborn had shown no mercy when they destroyed Earth, he argued, and humanity owed them no consideration in return. Every moment they delayed gave their enemies more time to prepare whatever trap they had surely set. Justice demanded that they strike now with everything they had, overwhelming whatever defenses the aliens might be hiding. Dr. Lisa Chun represented the voices calling for caution. The scientific analysis of the system showed technology beyond human understanding, she pointed out, and the apparent lack of defenses could indicate confidence rather than weakness. The Voidborn might have weapons that made conventional defenses unnecessary, or they might have already prepared to evacuate their population to safety. Rushing into attack, without understanding the situation, could result in the destruction of the entire human fleet. The alien allies added their own perspectives to the discussion. Harmony of the Melody people argued that his race had also sought immediate revenge when their world was destroyed, and their haste had led to the loss of most of their remaining ships. The Builder representative, speaking through a translation device that turned its crystalline communications into human speech, suggested that understanding Voidborn technology might be more valuable than destroying it. The Hive Speaker Queen buzzed her agreement with the attack faction, her translated words calling for overwhelming assault before the enemy could respond. As the debate continued, more transmissions arrived from the planet below. The Voidborn voice provided detailed specifications for the proposed meeting. A single ship from each side would approach neutral coordinates between the planet and the human fleet. The aliens offered to provide complete technical specifications for their vessel to prove they carried no weapons, and they requested similar information from humanity. Most strangely, they suggested that the meeting take place aboard a specially constructed platform that would be jointly built by both sides. The final transmission contained something that stunned everyone who heard it. After providing all the technical details of the proposed meeting, The alien voice added a single word that every human in the fleet recognized: remember. It was the same word that had been Earth's final transmission, the last message broadcast from humanity's dying homeworld. Hearing it spoken by one of the creatures responsible for that world's destruction sent waves of shock and anger through the fleet. Some commanders interpreted it as mockery, the aliens taunting them with the last words of their victims. Others wondered if it might mean something else entirely, a message they had not understood when it was first broadcast 3 years ago. Maria Santos found herself chosen to represent humanity at the proposed meeting, a decision that reflected both her position as the fleet's primary tactical commander and her personal connection to Earth's destruction. Her family had died in the first wave of attacks on the European cities, and her commitment to vengeance was absolute. If the aliens wanted to talk, she would listen, but she would also be ready to act the moment they revealed their true intentions. The construction of the meeting platform took 2 days, a joint effort that revealed fascinating details about void-born technology. The aliens provided blueprints for a structure that seemed to exist partially outside normal space-time, a diplomatic neutral ground that would be equally accessible to both sides. Human engineers worked alongside alien constructor drones to build something that neither species could have created alone. The platform itself was a marvel of impossible architecture, a crystalline structure that seemed to shift and flow even as it maintained perfect stability. Gravity worked normally inside the central meeting chamber, but the walls showed views of stars that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The air itself seemed to shimmer with energy that made the human visitors feel both perfectly safe and completely out of place. The Void-born representative arrived exactly on schedule, traveling in a ship that looked more like a work of art than a vehicle of war. The vessel seemed to be made of liquid light held in a solid form, its hull flowing and changing as it moved through space. It docked with the platform using connection methods that human engineers could observe but not understand. The being that emerged from the ship challenged every assumption humans had made about their enemies. Instead of the monstrous creature they had expected, they found something that seemed almost ethereal, a tall figure wrapped in robes of shifting energy that made it impossible to see any physical details. When it spoke, its voice carried the same infinite sadness they had heard in the transmissions. "I am called Echo," the being said, its words somehow translating directly into perfect human speech without any visible communication device. "I speak for those you call the Void-born, though that is not what we call ourselves. We have waited 3 years for this meeting, hoping beyond hope that we might find a way to heal the wound that was torn between our peoples." Maria Santos felt her hand move instinctively toward the sidearm she carried, even though she knew weapons would be useless in this place outside normal space. Every instinct screamed that this was a trap, that the creature before her was responsible for the greatest crime in human history. The rage that had sustained her through years of preparation demanded that she strike now, that she make this alien pay for what its people had done to Earth. But something in Echo's voice gave her pause. The sadness seemed genuine, and there was no trace of the arrogance or mockery she had expected from humanity's enemies. The alien spoke of wounds between peoples rather than conquest and victory. Most puzzling of all, it claimed it had been waiting for this meeting, as if the destruction of Earth had been as much a tragedy for the Void-born as it had been for humanity. "You destroyed our world," Maria said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "You murdered billions of innocent people. There could be no healing for a crime of that magnitude." Echo's form seemed to flicker with something that might have been grief. "That is what we must discuss," it replied. "The truth of what happened to your Earth, and why the word remember was the last thing transmitted from both our worlds on that terrible day." The revelation that the Void-born had also transmitted the word remember sent shockwaves through Maria and the small diplomatic team that accompanied her. It suggested a connection between the two events that no one had considered, a shared experience that neither side had understood. As Echo began to explain what had really happened on the day Earth died, Maria realized that everything they thought they knew about their enemies might be wrong. The meeting continued for hours as Echo shared information that challenged every assumption the human fleet had made about the Void-born and their motivations. The truth that emerged would force humanity to choose between the vengeance they had sought for 3 years and an alliance that might be their only hope for survival against a threat that made their previous conflict seem trivial by comparison. The truth struck Captain Maria Santos like a physical blow, forcing her to grip the crystalline table to keep from falling. Echo's words echoed through the impossible meeting chamber as the Void-born representative shared memories that no human had ever seen before. Through advanced neural interfaces that connected directly to her consciousness, Maria experienced the events of 3 years ago from the alien perspective, and what she saw changed everything she thought she knew about Earth's destruction. She stood on the bridge of a Void-born ship as it emerged from hyperspace near Earth's solar system. The crew around her radiated exhaustion and desperation, refugees fleeing from something so terrible that they had traveled across the galaxy to escape it. Their homeworld was gone, consumed by an entity that devoured entire star systems, leaving nothing but empty space where civilizations had once thrived. The Void-born were not conquerors but survivors, seeking any habitable world where they might rebuild their shattered civilization. The terraforming technology they carried was their greatest achievement and their last hope, designed to quickly transform lifeless worlds into gardens that could support billions of refugees. The massive machines could reshape entire planets in a matter of hours. They had used this technology successfully on dozens of worlds as they fled across the galaxy, creating temporary homes while they searched for somewhere they could make a permanent stand against the darkness that pursued them. But Earth was different from the other worlds they had encountered. The planet's unique electromagnetic field, generated by its unusual magnetic core and enhanced by the activities of human civilization, created interference patterns that the Void-born had never seen before. Their terraforming systems, designed to work with the natural energy fields of uninhabited worlds, began to malfunction the moment they entered Earth's atmosphere. Maria felt Echo's horror as the terraforming machines went wild, their carefully controlled energy discharges turning into destructive beams that carved through human cities like knives through paper. The Void-born had tried desperately to shut down their equipment, but the feedback from Earth's magnetic field had created a cascade failure that turned their tools of creation into instruments of destruction. Every attempt to stop the process only made it worse, amplifying the destructive energy until entire continents were scarred by fires that burned with alien intensity. The word, remember, had been transmitted by both species at the same moment. On Earth, it was humanity's final plea for their story to survive the destruction of their world. Among the Void-born, it was Echo's desperate message to its own people, a command to remember this tragedy and ensure that it never happened again. The neural interface allowed Maria to feel Echo's grief as it watched a beautiful world die, knowing that its people's desperate flight from one cosmic horror had accidentally created another. When the terraforming disaster finally ended, Earth was dead, and the Void-born were left with the knowledge that they had become exactly the kind of monsters they had been fleeing from. The refugees who had sought only to survive had instead committed genocide on a scale that dwarfed even the entity that had destroyed their own homeworld. Echo's people had spent the next 3 years trying to develop technology that might somehow undo what they had done, hoping against hope that they could bring back the billions of innocent lives their accident had claimed. The beautiful world that Maria had seen from orbit was not the Void-born homeworld, but a monument they had built to honor Earth and its lost people. Every crystal spire was grown in patterns that matched human architecture from before the disaster. Every garden contained recreations of Earth's ecosystems, painstakingly rebuilt from genetic samples recovered from the wreckage of humanity's homeworld. The flowing rivers of liquid silver were meant to represent the tears of an entire species grieving for the crime they had accidentally committed. Echo showed Maria deeper into the planetary memorial, revealing chambers where perfect holographic recreations of human life played endlessly. Children laughing in Earth's parks, scientists making discoveries in laboratories, artists creating beauty in studios filled with natural light. The Void-born had spent 3 years studying every fragment of human culture they could recover, trying to understand the people they had unknowingly murdered and preserve their memory for future generations. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. The terraforming disaster had not just destroyed Earth. It had also damaged the Void-born technology so severely that they could no longer flee from the cosmic entity that had been pursuing them. Their ships were stranded in this corner of the galaxy, unable to continue their escape from the darkness that consumed entire star systems. The entity that the Void-born called the Devourer was still coming, following the trail of destroyed worlds across the galaxy, and it would reach this system within a matter of months. The Devourer was something beyond the understanding of either humans or Void-born, a force of entropy and destruction that seemed to exist for no purpose other than consuming everything it encountered. It had already devoured hundreds of civilizations, entire sectors of the galaxy reduced to empty space as the entity fed on planets and stars alike. The Voidborn had been fleeing it for centuries, always staying just ahead of its inexorable advance. But the accident that destroyed Earth had also ended their ability to run. Echo's people had been preparing for their final battle when humanity's revenge fleet appeared on their sensors. The arrival of 100,000 human warships, accompanied by alien allies who had also lost worlds to void-born accidents, offered something the refugees had never dared hope for: the possibility of mounting a defense that might actually stop the devourer. Alone, neither humans nor void-born had the strength to face such a cosmic threat, but together they might have a chance. Maria felt her worldview crumbling as she processed everything Echo had shared with her. The creatures she had spent 3 years learning to hate were not the monsters she had imagined, but fellow victims of cosmic tragedy. The beautiful world below was not a fortress of conquerors, but a memorial to the very people she represented. The Voidborn were not preparing to destroy humanity's fleet, but hoping to join forces with it against an enemy that threatened all life in the galaxy. The neural connection ended, leaving Maria alone with her thoughts in the crystalline meeting chamber. Echo waited patiently as she struggled to accept the truth that changed everything about their mission of revenge. The rage that had sustained her through years of preparation and months of travel still burned within her, but it no longer had a clear target. How could she hate beings who mourned Earth's destruction as deeply as humanity did? "This could all be lies," Maria said finally, though even as she spoke the words she knew they weren't true. The neural interface had shown her memories too detailed and too emotionally genuine to be fabrications. "You could be trying to save yourselves by convincing us you're innocent." Echo's form flickered with what might have been understanding. "That is what I would think if our positions were reversed," it replied. "But consider this. If we were truly your enemies, why would we have waited here for you to arrive? Why would we have allowed your fleet to approach our world unopposed? We could have fled before you reached this system, or we could have set traps that would have destroyed your ships before you knew we were here." The logic was undeniable, but Maria found herself grappling with more than just tactical considerations. If the Voidborn were telling the truth, then humanity's great crusade for vengeance had been based on a misunderstanding. The 100,000 ships gathered at the edge of the system, the alien allies who had joined their cause, the 3 years of preparation, and 6 months of travel, all of it had been aimed at the wrong enemy. "What do you want from us?" Maria asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Alliance," Echo replied without hesitation. "The Devourer will arrive in this system within 4 months. Our remaining ships number fewer than 1,000, and they are damaged and poorly equipped for combat. Your fleet carries the largest concentration of military force we have ever seen, but even 100,000 warships may not be enough to stop what is coming. Together, combining our technologies and our knowledge, we might have a chance to make a stand that could save both our peoples." The weight of the decision pressed down on Maria like a physical force. She had come here seeking vengeance for Earth's destruction, but she had found instead an opportunity to prevent countless other worlds from suffering the same fate. The Devourer that Echo described would not stop with the Voidborn refugees. It would continue across the galaxy, consuming every planet and every civilization in its path until nothing remained but empty space. Maria activated her communication link to the Retribution, knowing that Admiral Park would be monitoring the diplomatic meeting from the Fleet Command Center. "Admiral, I need to speak with you privately," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her mind. "The situation here is not what we expected." The conversation with Admiral Park lasted for hours as Maria shared everything she had learned from Echo. The neural interface recordings were transmitted back to the fleet, where teams of experts analyzed them for any sign of deception or manipulation. Dr. Lisa Chen's scientific team confirmed that the energy signatures in the Voidborn memories matched the readings they had taken from Earth's wreckage. The alien allies provided their own perspectives, with several species recognizing descriptions of the Devourer from their own historical records. The debate that followed divided the fleet as commanders struggled with the implications of Echo's revelations. Some still called for immediate attack, arguing that the Voidborn claims could not be trusted regardless of how convincing they seemed. Others pointed out that the evidence supported the alien story, and that attacking innocent refugees would make humanity no better than the monsters they had believed their enemies to be. Captain Tom Bradley of the Iron Fist remained convinced that this was an elaborate trap designed to prevent humanity from avenging Earth's destruction. Dr. Sarah Kim of the research vessel Deep Thought argued that the scientific evidence supported the void-born claims, and that the real enemy was the cosmic eddy approaching their position. The alien allies were similarly divided, with some species calling for alliance, while others demanded proof that the Devourer actually existed. The proof came sooner than anyone expected. Long-range sensors detected massive space-time distortions at the edge of the system, energy signatures unlike anything in any known database. The distortions were moving toward them at impossible speeds, bending reality around themselves as they approached. Whatever was creating those effects was larger than planets and more powerful than stars, a force of destruction that made even the great human armada seem insignificant by comparison. Admiral Park made his decision as the sensor readings confirmed Echo's warnings about the approaching threat. The fleet would stand down from its attack posture and enter into alliance with the void-born refugees. The 100,000 ships that had come seeking vengeance would instead prepare for a battle that would determine the survival of entire civilizations. It was not the outcome anyone had expected when they began their journey from human space, but it was the choice that honor and necessity demanded. The Great Armada began its transformation from an instrument of revenge into the backbone of an unlikely alliance. Human engineers worked alongside void-born technicians to integrate alien technology into their weapon systems. The refugee ships that had fled across the galaxy joined formation with humanity's warships, their advanced knowledge combining with human determination to create something neither species could have achieved alone. The memorial world below became a staging ground for the defense of the galaxy, its crystal spires repurposed as communication arrays and tactical centers. As the fleet prepared for the battle that would decide everything, Maria Santos found herself thinking about the word that had brought them all together. Remember had meant different things to different people. Humanity's plea for their story to survive, the void-born command to learn from tragedy, Echo's reminder of the cost of cosmic accidents. Now it would become something new entirely, a promise that the civilizations threatened by the Devourer would remember this moment when survival depended on choosing cooperation over vengeance, understanding over hatred, and hope over despair.